In this lecture, we're going to take a look at the key elements of Romanticism as they were expressed in American literature. I've mentioned previously that some scholars will have slightly different opinions as to the start and end dates for various literary aesthetics, but these dates almost always include the same key events. In our class, we'll define Romanticism as existing from 1789 to 1865. That is essentially from the period after the American Revolution up through the Civil War. In terms of technology, this is also the period in which printing technology moved from manual hand presses to mechanized presses, which allowed fiction to become a popular art form. In our discussion of Romanticism and fiction, I want to start with a series of challenges that early fiction writers faced, each of which helped shape the literary form that we now know as fiction. 1. Today, we live in a strange time. From your early years, you have been inculcated into a society that actively encourages you to develop deep emotional and intellectual relationships with characters and situations that you know, at least in part of your mind, don't exist. But when you are young, you watched animated films such as Snow White and The Lion King, and you were encouraged to form emotional connections to those characters as though they were real. As young adults, you likely read or watched Harry Potter stories, and who didn't feel nervous trepidation when Voldemort moved in for an attack, and who didn't quietly root for Harry to overcome villains that were older and stronger than he was? Or to put this another way, in the past week, how many hours did you spend engaged with characters and situations that you knew in part of your brain weren't real? You can quietly count up those hours? Consider TV, streaming video, YouTube, other web videos, Netflix, theaters, books, short stories, even some types of narrative video games. If you add up those hours, was it 5 hours for the last week? Probably not. Was it 10 or 20, perhaps more? From a certain perspective, we live in a super messed up world. We have been encouraged since birth to develop deep relationships with characters and situations that we know in part of our mind aren't real. But we have been seduced over the course of our life by a pleasurable suspension of disbelief so that we can engage the pleasures of fictional realities. But for early fiction writers, this is a significant hurdle. How do you get adults who aren't used to engaging fictional environments, to read about characters that they know don't exist? Sure, there were stories for kids in the 1700s and the 1800s, but children have wider imaginations than adults, and many of these children's stories also have pedagogical elements, such as Never Cry Wolf and Don't Wander Off with Strangers. But how do you get adults to use part of their scarce free time to engage situations that are entirely made up? In terms of structural barriers, this is one of the big issues that early fiction writers needed to overcome to simply convince an audience that the entire endeavor of fiction was a worthwhile pursuit. Number 2. America today is a nation of worldwide importance, a nation whose culture is immediately recognizable by people around the globe. But in the years after the American Revolution, America was still looked upon as a wilderness territory located halfway around the globe from Europe. Even Americans, for the most part after the Revolution, were more focused on events in Europe, England in particular, than they were in America. After all, up until the Revolution, citizens in the colonies thought of themselves as British citizens. Or let's think about this in contemporary terms. If today, the state of California decided to secede from the United States, assuming you've lived in California all your life, how long would it take you to no longer think of yourself as an American? Let's say that Oregon and Washington also secede, and together these 3 ex-states now become a new nation named, let's call it Pacifica. How long would it take you before your inner compass redirected itself so that you immediately thought of yourself as a Pacifican rather than as an American? Would it take a year or 5 years? Would it take 10 years? Would you in some ways always think of yourself in that internal space as an American for the rest of your life? Well, this was another large challenge for early American fiction writers. Americans weren't particularly interested in reading about America. They felt that the other parts of the world, let's say London, for example, were far more culturally significant than America, and they also still had strong internal ties that connected them to those places. So if you're an American writer and know mostly about American situations, how then do you create stories that will interest readers whose eyes are fixed on events overseas? Number 3. After the Revolution, Americans decided that, well, officially, to promote literacy, it wouldn't honor British copyright. This is really just one big screw you to the Brits after the war. But from a practical standpoint, it meant that print shops in America could reprint British books without paying British publishers a licensing fee or paying British authors any royalties. That is, through this legal provision, American printers were incentivized to essentially pirate British books and create American editions for which the printers kept all of the profits. There are stories of American printers hiring literary scouts in England to acquire copies of new books so they could be sent back to the States by a fast ship so that the American printer could then produce an American edition that came out at the exact same time as the official British edition. Look at the problem this way. The American audience was mostly interested in the culture of Europe, so British books typically sold better than those by American authors. So in terms of profit motivation, printers were better directed at foreign material. And if they did want to work with an American author, they'd likely need to pay that author royalties or share receipts with them, which would further drive down the profits from that project. And lastly, Number 4, how might new works of fiction relate to other genres of written work, such as poetry and nonfiction, with which Americans were more familiar? That is, as printing material expands, how do you teach this larger audience how to enjoy fiction using tools for which they are familiar, such as with poetry or nonfiction? And as we move into individual stories, we'll talk about how individual authors wrestle with each of these problems. But to understand how fiction, this emerging form, developed as a popular force by building on the materials of poetry and nonfiction, we first need to understand a little about the artistic goals of Romanticism as they applied to poetry and nonfiction at this time. When the technology of steam-powered presses first emerged to elevate fiction to a popular form, other genres of writing were exploring the components of Romanticism. Number 1. For our class, as I've already said, we'll place Romanticism between 1789 and 1865. Romantics overall embraced many ideals that the Enlightenment rejected, such as imagination and extreme emotion. As with many artistic movements, Romanticism was a reactionary or counter-movement. That is, it reacted to the period that preceded it. It is a corrective movement. Early Romantics noted that Enlightenment art was cold and impersonal. Because of this, they strove to make art more compassionate, more imaginative, and more connected to the inner life of individuals. Number 2, its view of people. During the Enlightenment, people were mainly viewed as physical beings. Intellect was valued over emotion. With advances in medical science, human beings were observed as intricate assemblies of tissues, organs, and fluids. Romanticism strove to redefine such understandings, believing that people were more than just intellects and organs on legs, but instead possessed the potential for significant emotional and imaginative experience. Through the depiction of emotion and imagination, Romantic writers hoped to arrive at a fuller portrait of human experience. The sensitive or spiritual man was very much the hero of the day. In short, the Enlightenment valued the centrist or representative individual, while Romanticism valued individuals at the peripheries of human experience. Number 3, individuality. The Enlightenment, to a certain extent, devalued individuality, focusing on ways that individuals were alike. Our physical bodies are similar, our environment is constant, as are our founding beliefs. In America, the Enlightenment had been focused on building a nation and creating cities, producing documents that ensured that large groups of people could successfully live together. In short, it focused on cooperative living for financial and political gain. During the Romantic period, however, individuality was valued, particularly in regards to solitary, isolated experiences. For example, many of Emily Dickinson's poems explore her experience by herself, as do Walt Whitman's reflections on his identity. Likewise, many of Edgar Allan Poe's short stories focus on sensitive, isolated individuals who eventually go mad, such as the narrator of The Telltale Heart. Number 4, nature. To access deeper emotions, many Romantic writers advocated for new connections with nature. Writers such as Henry David Thoreau meditated on the natural world, believing that such experience would open them to a new world of emotion, intuition, and self-value. Through nature, as opposed to academic study or controlled social experiences in a city, people explored their deeper natures. Number 5. Peak experiences. Because Romanticism valued emotional writing, the works of such authors naturally depicted peak experiences, that is, great elation, and on the other side, great sadness. The two key terms associated with these peak experiences are romantic ecstasy and romantic agony. Fiction writers often utilize characters who experienced emotions at deeper levels than did average people. Many works of Romantic literature, particularly the Gothic romance as exemplified by the work of Poe, depict robust and rarely experienced emotions, including paranoia, terror, panic, and horror. Looking back, some literary critics see a manic-depressive quality in the writings of some Romantic authors. In fact, these same critics believe that at least some Romantic writers were uniquely isolated, focusing their attention inward, and perhaps a poor representation of the average person of the era. Toward the end of the Romantic period, new realist writers reacted to this very point, that Romanticism had not depicted the average person, but instead had depicted an aberration of such an individual, thereby valuing unusual experiences over the everyday. And 6, the audience. In part, the American fascination with Romantic individualism stems from a new class of merchant and business owners with leisure time that allowed them to discover or explore their own individual identities. Along with this, it is also that new merchant and business class who are able to afford books as they're being produced. And so, as an extension of this, in the Romantic literature that we'll see in this class, we will often see middle upper class or upper class characters whose lives very much match the type of readers who would then buy those books. So how then do we read these elements of Romanticism in Romantic literature? I have here a couple of poems from the period, which I'll read stanza by stanza. Remember, poetry is the better established literary form in the early 1800s. Better established, I mean, than fiction. And I'll talk about the elements of Romanticism after each stanza. Poetry is going to be one of the influences that then later shapes fiction as it develops. The first poem is called The Wild Honeysuckle by Philip Freneau, and I should mention that you can find both of these poems in our online form if you'd like to look at them in text form. Here is the first stanza. Fair flower that does so comely grow, hid in this silent, dull retreat, untouched thy honey blossoms blow. Unseen thy little branches greet. No roving foot shall crush thee here, no busy hand provoke a tear. And I will pause there for a second. So what's happening in the first stanza, first of 4, in this poem by Philip Freneau? Well, first of all, Philip, or Phil, our good Romantic, has done his job by leaving the city. What has the Enlightenment built for Americans in the country? Well, they built these centers of commerce, these centers of business that have high density, and To get away from that is also to have the possibility to know something about yourself in a way that you can't know that in the busy world of the city. So our dear friend Phil here has gotten out of the city. He's gotten into his car, or whatever passed for a car a couple hundred years ago. He's taken out his earbuds. He's put all the conventions of city living behind, and he's gone out to nature. He's gone out to the forest. He's found a place beside a trail where he's going to be able to focus on an icon of nature. This would be a familiar trope for the Romantics. Phil Furneaux is going to focus on a piece of nature, this one flower, and there's going to be a reflexive element to this. He's going to study the flower in nature to understand its life, but in return, by understanding how nature works, he is then going to understand something about himself. And so he's found this flower. It's by a stream. It's in a lovely place. There's a stand of trees that's going to give it some early morning shade, and in the afternoon, it's going to have some sunlight. Here is stanza 2. By nature's self in white arrayed, she bade thee shun the vulgar eye, and planted here in the guardian shade, and sent soft waters murmuring by. Thus quietly the summer goes, thy day declining to repose. And here Phil Furneaux is beginning to reach for one of those two peak experiences. He's beginning to move toward romantic ecstasy, this mercurial feeling of strong emotion, of pure goodness. He recognizes that nature is taking care of this flower. And he sees that there's shade and there's sun and there's water moving by, and he understands that nature is taking care of this flower. And here comes the reflexive elements. As an extension of that, Phil is also able to know that there's some larger force in the world that then is taking care of him. Maybe he has a pretty good job back home. Maybe he has a nice place to live. Maybe he has friends. But he's getting the sense that there is some larger force out there that is helping to arrange his world in a way that's pleasurable to him as well. And thinking about these forces, these beneficial entities that are not only creating a pleasurable life for the flower, but also for Phil, he's being moved out of his everyday complacency towards a sense of elation, a sense of gratitude and recognition that there's something strong in the world that's taking care of him. Next stanza, stanza 3. Smite with those charms that must decay, I grieve to see your future doom. They died, nor were those flowers more gay, the flowers that did in Eden bloom. Unpitying frost and autumn's power shall leave no vestige of this flower. And here Phil is moving from romantic ecstasy to the other side of the spectrum, romantic agony, as he starts to imagine how time is going to move forward. A minute ago, everything was great, but then Phil seems to recognize that for a moment he forgot about the seasons. And right now, the flower is being taken care of, but a few months forward, there's going to be snow and ice, and this flower is going to be buried beneath frost. And what he's saying is that this flower is going to be annihilated. If he comes back in a year from now, there's going to be no vestige, no sign that this flower was ever here. It'll be entirely wiped off the earth. And then there is this reflexive element that Phil Furneaux is then able to point back to himself. He recognizes that maybe there's a sense in which there's an afterlife that he's going to participate in, and that his life will go on in some sentient form in that other dimension. But he also seems to recognize that his life might be like the flowers, that he might be utterly wiped from this earth, lights off, no consciousness. That is the end of a sensation of self, and that thought seems to terrify him. And with that, he is moved from ecstasy to agony as he starts to contemplate not only the flower's demise, but by extension, his own demise in the coming years as well. In the last stanza, stanza 4, he considers what it is then he should take away from this experience. From morning suns and evening dews, At first the little bean came, if nothing once, you nothing lose. For when you die, you are the same. The space between is but an hour, the frail duration of a flower. And so his takeaway from this experience in the woods, focusing on this icon of nature, this flower, seems to be that you need to keep in mind that life is short, that there's sweetness in it, that there are forces out there that will help take care of you, but life does not go on forever. So you need to focus on the goodness of this day and of the days to come, because one day that time will be over. The other poem that I brought in today, which is also a 4-stanza poem, is by Emily Dickinson. Most of her poems were unpublished during her lifetime and were discovered after her passing in folio arrangements in her bedroom. And so none of these poems had titles, and so the Emily Dickinson poems are typically known by either one of two titles. The first way to title an Emily Dickinson poem is to use the first line as though it were also its title. And so this poem might be called I Taste a Liquor Never Brewed, but this poem might also be referred to in that other way. The other way to refer to an Emily Dickinson poem is to call it by its numeric marker in the folio system. And so you can also call this poem by the super sexy name 214 if you choose to do so. Here is the first stanza. I taste a liquor never brewed, from tankards scooped in pearl. Not all the vats upon the Rhine yield such an alcohol. Okay, there's our first stanza. This is going to be a drinking poem. In fact, this is going to be a poem about binge drinking. And this might be a poem that's literally about the experience of binge drinking, or this might be a poem that's using the experience of binge drinking to then talk about the consumption of emotion. And so Emily Dickinson in this poem is either going to be talking about consuming a great deal of alcohol, or is going to be talking about consuming a great deal of emotion, and how one of these experiences has a lasting effect on how she thinks about herself. In the first stanza, we can see some things about the alcohol or the alcohol metaphor. It's kept in a tankard scooped in pearl, and so this is a decorative decanter. I don't know, if you go to a college party out on the lawn in a tankard scooped in mud, as I recall, there is very inexpensive booze, usually Natty Light. I don't know what they're serving now. It was Natty Light a long time ago, or Meisterbrow, and then it was served up in these red plastic cups. What Emily here is having seems to be the exact opposite of that. This is an ornamented tankard scooped in pearl. And so whatever here is behind the bar, it's in a unique container that has been bejeweled in such a way to indicate that it's rare, that it's expensive, that it is a truly fine experience. Stanza 2. Inebriate of air am I, and debauchee of dew, reeling through endless summer days from inns of molten blue. And here, Emily Dickinson is beginning to move a little, by degrees, towards romantic ecstasy. There's a pleasant sensation swelling inside of this that often accompanies the beginning of drink, and she seems to be here expressing a desire to continue that sensation of experiencing these emotions, or perhaps this particular drink. Stanza 3. When landlords turn the drunken bee out the foxglove's door, when butterflies renounce their drams, I shall drink but the more. And here Emily is saying that whatever this experience is, emotion or alcohol, that she has found such a strong goodness in it, such a strong ecstasy in it, that she wants to drink but the more, continue consuming this experience so that it expands inside of her. When landlords turn the drunken bee out the foxglove's door, that means at 2 a.m., when the barkeep turns the stools upside down on the table and throws all the lights fully on and says, "Hey, everyone, get out." What Emily is going to do is drink but the more. When people around here push aside those schooners of beer and say they don't want any more, that is, when the butterflies renounce their drams, Emily says, I shall drink but the more. Stanza 4. till seraphs swing their snowy hats. And what is a seraph? A seraph is a biblical term for a winged angel. And so Emily seems to be growing taller so that she is gaining elevation. So these winged creatures, like large birds, go flapping by till seraphs swing their snowy hats, and saints to windows run to see the little tippler. And who is the tippler? Well, the tippler is the person tipping back the drink. To see the little tippler, that's Emily herself, to see the little tippler leaning against the sun. And so what is the image that we have here at the end of the poem? It's that Emily has bodily expanded with this emotion inside of her so that she can see winged creatures moving across her field of vision. And down below, there are saints outside the bar. They're running to their windows, presumably pointing their fingers upward to indicate that Emily has suddenly become very large, very tall. How tall? Well, so tall that she can be, presumably elbow akimbo, leaning against the sun. That is, the sense of emotion or drink here is so large inside of her that she imagines or becomes a creature that then is able to interact with celestial entities. She is leaning against the sun. This is a poem of pure romantic ecstasy in which Emily has found a very large sense of herself inside of it. And now in our next lecture, we will begin to look at individual stories in the Romantic period and talk about how they too relate to these key core concepts of Romanticism.